Thank you so much, and welcome to the luncheon at the second day here of the ASU GSV Summit. Really excited by the conversation we're about to have about bending the arc of human potential at work amidst a lot of obsolescence, digitization, disruption, you name your buzzword, it's going on in the workforce. And the question is how our workplace is going to become more agile in supporting learning for their employees. We've got a great group of people to talk about that. I'm not going to go through bios, but just going down the line. Brad here from Intuit. We've got Leighanne from Workday, Marius from UiPath, and of course Frida, thank you for being here from Pymetrics. And I'll start off with a conversation. Maybe Frida, you jump in.
Sure.
I'd love you each just to talk about how you come to this work and how it intersects with your day-to-day, just to start grounding us.
Sure, absolutely. So again, thanks for having me. So I'm Frida, Polli. I'm the CEO of a company called Pymetrics. Pymetrics uses behavioral science and artificial intelligence to optimally match people to work. And I came to it from an academic background. I spent 10 years at Harvard and MIT as a scientist, and then saw the problem of recruiting in the real world and realized we have a lot that we could be helpful with. I think the biggest challenge that we're facing now is that with this whole transformation to the future of work, new roles are so ill-defined that the way that we categorize them, classify them, describe them is changing moment to moment. And we really need to avail ourselves of new tools like machine learning, like other talent signals, to really help that optimization process, both from a recruiting perspective, but also from an internal mobility and reskilling perspective.
Marius, Istrate. I joined a company named UiPath a couple of years ago. I have a background in software engineering, and I was actually automated out of a job about 5 years ago. So I decided to, dig a little bit in depth and understand what's happening, and I joined a company that is impacting the future of work. What UiPath does is robotic process automation and artificial intelligence. Essentially, we're helping companies automate tedious, mundane, repetitive tasks, right? So that employees can focus on the more creative work. And obviously, as we do that, we unpack a set of challenges with respect to creativity in the workplace, future jobs. What do future jobs look like? What are people going to work on? So, excited to discuss these topics with everyone today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Leighanne Levensaler, and I'm with Workday. I'm in a strategy role at Workday. And Workday supports over 2,600 customers, both employers and educational institutions. We sort of sit at the intersection of education, employers, and technology. We help your companies manage employees, contractors, faculty, staff, student workers. We're approaching 40 million workers that we support, so that's kind of how we come to this conversation. And what we're hearing from our customers is that their talent practices are undergoing significant change. And that's largely due to the way that we're working is changing, due to automation, machine learning, and that they need new technologies, new organizing principles, new ways of operating to really keep pace with business. So that's part of the way I come to this conversation. I'm also heading up our Workday Ventures arm, and we're making investments in innovative solutions that are complementary to our platform, but also really getting after these problems of how do we close the opportunity divide, and really how do we create a better experience for workers. So thanks for having me today.
Great. And I'm Brad Smith. I just recently stepped down as the CEO of Intuit, the maker of TurboTax, Mint, QuickBooks. I was with the company for 16 years. I'm now the executive chairman. And the reason why I'm here is our company is passionate about backing those, championing those who dare to dream. So these are the families who struggle to make it paycheck to paycheck, the self-employed and the small businesses that truly employ 60% of the world's workforce and create 80% of all the net new jobs. And that puts an emphasis on agility and adaptability and, quite frankly, education. And now my personal passion is to try to figure out how to bring opportunity to those places that often get overlooked, those overlooked zip codes, in particular Appalachia, where I'm from.
So each of you comes at this from a slightly different perspective, but together I think we have a pretty good holistic view of it. I'm curious what's keeping you awake at night as you look at these issues. What do you feel like is under-addressed or the big problem that we need to attack? And maybe I'll pick on you, Leighanne, to start us off on where you see the big problems or challenges that we ought to be focusing on.
Well, my two small boys and my puppy keep me awake at night officially, but with respect to this issue, I think really two. One, that we're underinvesting, and two, that we're over-credentialing. And so on the underinvestment front, every company, every CEO says, we have these talent shortages, we have this, these acute problems in certain areas, but yet we're just not seeing the training and development budgets, the investments in workforce training increasing. In fact, over the last 30 years, it's decreased by half. And so I think that's fundamentally because this employer-employee contract has been broken. It's been broken for a long time. Employees just move around. They're not long tenured anymore like they used to be. As a result, employers don't want to invest in them and have them take their skills elsewhere. And it's a vicious cycle, isn't it, right? This vicious cycle. So we need to stop that vicious cycle. We need to come up with more creative solutions, which I think we're going to be talking about here today. And I think the second, on the over-credentialing, we go shopping for talent, employers do, and we look for an exact specification, an exact match. And we overemphasize more stringent, job requirements, 4-year degrees for middle skills, middle wage jobs, or even low skills, low wage jobs. We're asking for 4-year degrees when we don't need to be doing. We need to be taking a closer look. And many companies, and I applaud Google and IBM and Apple, several companies, JP Morgan, that have said, not every role needs a 4-year degree, and so let's look at this. Let's scrutinize that more. So these are two areas that I think are really vexing challenges for us, over credentialing and underinvesting.
Yeah. My opinion of what keeps me awake at night is that we have underestimated the effects of the fourth industrial revolution. We really have not seen this coming at this speed. We are definitely overwhelmed, and this has led us to often investing in the wrong places. There was a point made by Michael Coe last evening here on stage that the job of a coder might very well become, the job in the sweatshop of the early 20th century. And I believe that to be true. And we've directed our investment into some technical skills, believing that that is the only thing that we're going to need. We have overlooked areas that are critical. And I'm not referring just to leadership skills. I'm also referring to business skills, to pure business skills that we have just ignored. So we find ourselves with a workforce right now, 50% of it is almost 50% globally is millennials, right? We find ourselves in a situation where we have to operate global businesses spread across tens of countries in this world, and we don't know how. We don't know how to do it, right? And we've got the space and the time. We're carving out time to be creative and to work on these things, but we are not equipped to do it. So that's what.
Yeah, and I actually think we're kind of in a very interesting space right now, because I think that a lot of times when we think about what are the future challenges, we look to technology to help us with those challenges, and yet in this space in particular, technology, machine learning is often seen as the adversary of how we might fix this problem. That's actually what keeps me up the most, because I think that there is such huge potential for machine learning and artificial intelligence to actually solve this problem. And yet I think that there is skepticism, and rightly so, and in some cases rightly so, and then in some cases maybe not as much. There was an interesting presentation that I saw that with the last industrial revolution, with the steam engine, people's biggest concerns were that women's uteruses were going to fly out of their bodies because women had never traveled at such high speeds. And not to say that we're quite at that stage here, but I think that some of the fear is potentially, not as well-founded as it should be. And I truly believe that artificial intelligence, if you look at what machine learning has done for products, movies, books, it is 100% increased accessibility of creators that had never had access to common audiences before, and it's really expanded the power of the long tail, and that's what we need to have happen in our society. We need to have jobs, economic opportunity, and all the rest of it really be expanded to everyone, not this sort of hits-driven talent economy. And so I think that what keeps me up is that there's such huge potential for machine learning and technology to really help redistribute opportunity, and actually correct a lot of the biases that we've seen in a human-based employment system. And yet we really need to work together to achieve that common purpose, because things could go off the rail, not that people's uteruses are going to fly out, but something like that. And we do need to make sure that we have the right ethical guidelines, regulatory structure, and everything else to make sure that that technology is used for the purpose of advancing the future of work for everybody, and not just sort of repurposing sort of the biases that we already have. So.
And I would put probably a bow around all three of those comments, because for me, the three things that keep me awake at night is just the pace of change. The second is the evolving nature of work because of many of the things that Frida just said. And the third is the responsibility of leaders in this environment. So the pace of change is pretty self-evident. The experts suggest it's 10 times faster than it was 5 years ago. And in the Silicon Valley, the most popular joke is, why was the Almighty able to create heaven and earth in 7 days? It's because he didn't have legacy technology and an installed base of customers to migrate. And so it really puts a premium on adaptability and agility and the ability to sort of innovate and recreate and self-disrupt. The second is the nature of work, and I mentioned some of this in the opening statements, but a lot of people get misguided and think that we all work for Amazon and Microsoft and Intuit and Cisco, but 60% of the world works in a small business, and 80% of net new jobs are created in startups. We also have the nature of work with the freelance or gig economy, and emergent research suggests that about 36% of us now engage in that economy in somehow, and that's up from 17% just a couple decades ago, so it's completely redefining work. And then Frida suggested, maybe uteruses won't be flying out as we're in the airplane, but artificial intelligence, I can't speak from experience. I'm going to have to defer to experts. But the reality is artificial intelligence will require us to upskill and reskill many people. I've seen data that says 60% of all jobs will have 30% of the work automated. So what's that mean to a leader? And I think it's important for us, whether we're in academia or in industry, to create an environment of entrepreneurism, where we teach people to have discovery-driven thinking, where we teach people how to run rapid experiments, to treat failure and success the same way as an opportunity to learn, and to not wait for the future to come, but to create the future. And that takes a very different approach in leadership. It takes a lot of humility. It takes subjecting your own idea to a hypothesis as opposed to declaring that you have the answer. And I think that's sort of where we are right now as an industry and, quite frankly, as a nation.
So I'd love you to actually double-click on that, because the leaders point back to the underinvestment point seems super connected in this. And I know, Marius, you've talked a lot about this as well, and the global dimensions of it, and how do you think about this in a small company versus a large one, and the role of technology in automation, but actually turning it into an advantage. So let's start to go deeper on this underinvestment story, because at a place like here, it's actually easy to gloss over some of those details, to be frank, because we're talking a lot about how companies are increasingly investing in their workforces in this environment. That's not necessarily the landscape if you go broader.
I think it's important to start with a question. Are you targeting growth or hypergrowth? If you're targeting hypergrowth, you need to think in a global, inclusive way from day one. There is no alternative to that. Thinking that way requires a certain set of leadership skills. Right? It requires a certain set of listening, of active listening mechanisms. Requires a profound understanding of culture, right, and cultural difference. This is not something we were, naturally equipped with or educationally equipped with. Even in Western or in Europe, where there's, a larger diversity from a language standpoint and from a cultural standpoint, we're not equipped. We're not equipped for that. So I think this is the first important question to ask as business leaders. What are we looking to achieve? Because if we're looking to serve a small local market, right, where there is no need for us to co-opt Chinese and Japanese and French and Swedish to make this a successful business, then we're probably not going to have to ask ourselves a lot of questions over the next 3, 4, 5 years, right? Sometime after that. But if we're targeting something bigger and targeting hypergrowth, it's time we ask those questions. And as you dig in, as you start working around these countries, what we found and what other companies find, I believe, is that there is a certain lack of business skills, right? There is a lack of understanding on how to operate a business on on a global scale. And I'm not, when I say a business on a global scale, I don't necessarily mean a 40,000 employees business. It can be a business, the size of ours, which is 2,700 people, right? That's not a very large business, but we operate globally. And this is what we've learned. We need to enhance some of those business skills. And we're frankly struggling with it. We're struggling with it because we need to crunch 5 MBAs into 1 year and teach people that. How do you do that?
But if I can say something, I actually think that the underinvestment story may be changing. That's what I see in any case. So we work with companies to help them reskill their workforce, and that is actually a new theme that we've seen this year. And I think that there are a lot of examples already of companies that we see. You mentioned JP Morgan. I think UPS is another example where they're really looking carefully at I know that Accenture is another, this segment of the workforce, their jobs are at risk. How do we help? And yet we know that we have, 20% of our workforce is in jobs of the future that we can't even describe now with a job description and a credentialing mechanism and so on. So how do we use newer technologies, again, backed by machine learning, looking at behavioral signals, which have not historically been the typical talent signals, and how do we make that shift? And I think that at the World Economic Forum this year, there was actually a lot of talk about not only is this the right thing to do, it is definitely the right thing to do, but it's also the economically sound thing to do. Because quite frankly, if you have to go find a data scientist or something else in the wide world of applicants, good luck to you. They don't exist. You know what I mean? You might as well invest in people that you know, that you like, that you have been good at your company, and really double down on the talent that you have and help them understand and help them move into the jobs of the future.
And who understand your culture.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. And there's the whole cultural fit. So I actually think this is changing. It may not be changing fast enough, I would argue, but I think
would say
that there's
the appetite, the desire to change is absolutely there. I mean, I think there's, and any study you look at, it's CEOs are preoccupied with the skills gap, or their unique skills gap with certain segments of the workforce, hyper-local, of course, not this broad kind of, mythical skills gap, but the one that they're facing very uniquely. They have that. But I also, at the same time, in talking with learning and development organizations and talent leaders and companies, they're just simply not seeing the increase of their budget. And so you have to step back and say, well, why? Why aren't we seeing the action kind of backed up as an employer? And again, I don't think this is just the employer's responsibility. I do believe this is a coalition approach with educational institutions, with entrepreneurial community, as well as policy, public government organizations as well. So I do believe this is a coalition. But if we just turn to the employer for a second, their budgets are not increasing, despite it being a priority. And part of it is lack of infrastructure. Companies have really not been investing at the rate that they should have in learning and development for all these years, right? For a long time. And now they're saying, is that the right way to do this? Is that the right way to solve this problem? So I totally agree with you, Frida, that we need to abstract a lot of this complexity, use machine learning, use automation to abstract a lot of the complexity that we have in our skills-based labor market, and really use it to our advantage, use that technology to our advantage. Sunday, I was on an airplane, and I ordered my groceries on Instacart. And Instacart knew what I needed to fulfill based on my last order. I arrived home, they were there, I pushed one button, got paid for them, and that has abstracted a trip to the grocery store, lots of decision making, a whole payment process, a whole delivery system. But yet we're still conflicted on how do we address this, supply and demand, sending the right supply and right demand signal. So I think we have a lot more work to do to remove friction. I am optimistic that the desire to change is there.
But let me build on that for a minute when we talk about shrinking L&D budgets or not enough budget. And I think one of the things we have to do as leaders, whether in academia or in industry, is we have to redefine learning to not be a program, but to be actually a way of doing our jobs every day. For example, at Intuit, we train all 9,000 employees on experiential learning. So we train them on the techniques of having a big, important problem to solve, going broad to go narrow, having a hypothesis, running experiments, treating success and failure the same way, and then betting on the things that are going to succeed. And the reason why I say that is because that applies to HR and to finance and to legal and to engineering and design. And right now we have 1,800 experiments running in the company. And it produced $400 million in revenue growth that I never once said in a boardroom, hey, let's go build this. It came from the experimentation of those closest to the customer. And the reason why I say that is what's powerful is if you do that correctly, it's diversity of thought. You may have a specialist in engineering or a specialist in design, but they can't build it on their own. You get the power of diverse thinking, and then people learn through osmosis. They learn by doing, and that costs nothing. Right. What it basically is here's a huge problem we have to solve. For example, in West Virginia, opioid addiction. So we train the students at West Virginia University and Marshall University on these techniques, and they're solving, running experiments. How do we overcome this problem? And I think there's techniques that we can apply as leaders that get past the budget constraints and literally build this into the DNA of how we do our work.
That's a very nice workaround, but I want to respond a bit to Leighanne's challenge about the budgets. There's a gentleman coming on stage later, after us, who made a point in his book, Work Rules, whom I respect deeply, I must say, who made a point in his book, Work Rules, that if you are increasing your training budgets, it means you're not hiring the right way. Right?
Very interesting.
So you're not hiring for the right skills. And this was the paradigm, the mindset for a while.
Yeah.
We have to acknowledge that. That's why budgets have not increased. If, as a people and talent leader, if I go and say, I need to increase my learning and development budget, what for? You were supposed to hire the best people with those skills.
Right. Yeah.
What are you going to train them on right now?
Right.
So I think Brad's, this proposed approach of kind of lean, continuous experimentation, throwing people into the fire, and giving them the ball and letting them run with the ball. This is the new kind of learning and development paradigm.
No disagreement that learning in the flow of the work is the right approach. It does require infrastructure. These programs require support infrastructure. We need to understand the impact of those relative to other investments we could be making. I don't mean the L&D budget, but across the organization. So no disagreement. But you're also assuming if you're hired just for the right skills at the right time, that they're not changing, and they're changing at an accelerated pace. And we all know that we need to be, continuous learners, but we need an infrastructure in which we can continuously learn. It's just not about the employee saying, "I'm going to take my, ownership of my career and go learn." We need a support infrastructure, and that needs to be provided by the employer and a broader ecosystem. We can't advocate responsibility just to the learner, just to the employee.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, I think that is a sort of old way of thinking about things, that, somehow these people with all these skills exist miraculously. And again, to my point, if you look into the economy of people that are job seeking, those skills don't exist either. So it's sort of, we can argue as to whose responsibility it is, whether it's the educational system, the employer, the government, whoever, but these skills need to be developed in the talent pool. And I think that, that's another part of the equation, is I think there's so much flux in the educational system these days in terms of what that should provide, whether it's high school students, college students. There's so much change that's happening at that level that we're involved in a consortium of employers in New York, led by JP Morgan and some other large employers, that are trying to take both the internship model and also underprivileged students in state colleges and trying to bring them into the market of professional work, as opposed to relegating them to sort of hourly work. And there's so much confusion as to where the ownership lies of who should train them, how should this credentialing process be stood up, what is the involvement of all these different parties. And you hear this all over the place. There are people that are arguing that just like the last industrial revolution, there should be a massive investment from government in this area. Now, will we see that? I don't know. What's the alternative? The alternative is some sort of public-private partnership that we can all get behind. And what does that look like? How do regulatory bodies get involved? Again, I think it's always interesting to look to the past for examples of how we've addressed these problems. But to your point, and to everyone's point, it's such a different world that we live in that maybe past models of how we stood up an educational system through government funding, A, won't work, B, is never going to happen, and we need a completely new model. So there's a lot of confusion, I think.
Are we creating an infrastructure that will support people who will change 20 jobs during their active life? Because that's the reality. That's what's going to happen. Right?
So let's use that as a pivot to get into the solutions.
Sure.
What should this look like as we start to marshal forward? If you all were to start to architect this, where would responsibility lie? Where would we redefine these points of interoperability between education and employment? And don't leave out the gig workers,
Right.
gig employees as well that might not have an employer to make that investment. How does this all work in your mind?
Well, I'll start. We are the they. It's going to be a collective systemic approach. And if I had a wish list and I think about all the things we can't anticipate, but at least you look at the trajectory of what we see, I wish we had talent that were really grounded in the 4Ds. And I realize that sounds like my report card in high school, but the first is discovery-driven thinking. The days of developing a 3-year plan with a Gantt chart and executing year 1, year 2, year 3 are gone. It literally becomes obsolete in 6 months. So the ability to have a hypothesis-driven approach and experimentation and teaching kids, there's no more pass-fail. There's give it a shot, learn from the mistakes, and pivot, because that's truly what we look for in business. The second D after discovery-driven thinking is developer acumen. Whether you know how to write code or you understand how code gets written or the fact that technology somehow impacts your world. I'm on the board of Nordstrom, which is a fashion retailer, and they're a technology company. There's no company that won't be affected by technology, so we truly have to have that appreciation. The third is design. You know, I have for a while, and many others have said it's not STEM, it's STEAM, including the arts. But if you look at what makes complex things simple, it's the ability to actually chip away and have the bare essence of what you need to be able to interoperate with a technology or a user interface. And then the fourth, and perhaps the most important, is data acumen, business statistics. Today, you can't manage a baseball team. You can't use your Apple Watch and know what your health is if you can't understand how to get truth in the data. And I think that's an educational opportunity, that's a workplace opportunity, it's a community opportunity for us to systemically build those capabilities, and I think that really positions us for the next chapter.
Yeah, and just building on what you were sharing, Brad, I like to take problems and break them down to the most atomic unit just to kind of get after it. And the one thing that we see over and over again is that we do not share a common language to express what we need and what we have and what we need, just across the entire ecosystem. And so one of the pursuits we're on now is developing a universal language for skills. I know many have tried. We think we're in a unique position to help companies and help the broader community with this problem, given the data set that we collect. I think that's really important, is to adequately share our supply and our demand. Very simple. We don't do that today. We all know that we don't do that today. And when we do that well, we can start to develop more innovative solutions. And so one of the reasons we have an investment fund, our investment thesis is that we're going to invest in this new world of work, and we're going to invest in companies that are designing solutions to help bridge that opportunity divide. I would also say, in an atomic unit level, I want to see a worker training credit, just the same way we have an R&D credit for products and services. For many years, I ran products at Workday, and every year we had to go through this whole big analysis of how we were innovating so we can get our training tax credit. Why don't we do that for training, reskilling, retooling our people? So, we really need to get after that. And then finally, these coalitions. I think you were referring to that, Frida. I think the bright stars we have out there, the great shining examples, are all coalition-run activities, and they're hyper-local around acute skill needs in certain industries. And I think we just need to do more of that.
Simple way of approaching things at UiPath. Travel, global travel. We take people and we expose them to business problems where the customers are, wherever that might be around the globe. We did not even know when we started this journey that one of the missions we're going to solve was to stop suicide in the workplace in Japan. Yet, here we are, right? How did we learn that? By going there, by spending time with those customers and educating ourselves into what that means. And we've got colleagues from across the globe traveling to Japan, to the United States, to France, to learn the problems of those customers. We put them in the context where they can learn. So that's our, in a nutshell, right? What we intend to do.
Yeah, and I don't have a specific solution, but I think there's certain themes that we all need to get behind. I think, as I mentioned in the beginning, I think one of the biggest challenges is fear of what's next. And how do we bridge the gap between what we're all talking about doing and the person that worries about how this is going to affect them. And so I think that there need to be mechanisms to build trust with a much broader audience and really have that buy-in, I guess. Then I think the way that we can encourage all of that is through transparency of what we're doing in terms of technology being much more transparent than it potentially has needed to be in the past. Having leadership that really values diversity and inclusion, because I think that that will, by definition, foster an atmosphere where people look to the leadership of a company, they see that it reflects them, not some group that they don't feel a part of, and that builds to this idea of transparency. And then accountability. I mean, we spend a lot of time in this space as creators of AI. I think people want to know how can I be sure that what you're doing is what you say you're doing. It's great. We've had all these examples of people saying trust me, and then you scratch beneath the surface, and the trust isn't there. So I think just some basic principles of accountability, trustworthiness, and diverse and inclusive leadership, I think, are just some key themes that needs to be a part of the solution, however it's built.
I will say I have a lot of trust in your app because I've used it and it said I should be a writer, and that's pretty accurate for what I do on a daily basis. But
I would also say, we're proud and honored to be investors in Pymetrics. But one of the reasons we love this solution so much, and we want all of our customers to use this solution, is it really does level the playing field and helps companies build a more diverse population, talent pool for them. And I think it's sort of the tip of the spear problem. And so one of the reasons we were so, frankly, eager, I might have begged Frida to invest, but to be part of that story because it is so powerful. So
thanks, Leighanne.
Thank you for what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you.
so I'm curious we've gone over some solutions. I'm curious that if the economic climate we're in right now changes, how this impacts all this. And based on time, we're probably going to have to end there. But in terms of right now, it's a tight labor market. There's a lot of need to attract employees and train them up because it's hard to find them, frankly. If we have an economic downturn, what's going to happen? What is this going to look like? Or are you all optimistic that leaders have gotten the message in either environment and that they will continually start to build the investments that they need to? Anyone want to? Yeah.
I'm optimistic because, again, I think that's what we see is, a much greater appetite potentially than in an environment where, there's less reining in of cost to actually devote resources that you were talking about before internally to that retraining, because at the end of the day, it's cost effective and it's the right thing to do, so that's what we see in the market. I can't speak to all companies, but that's definitely what we see. So.
And I'm optimistic as well. I see a change in mindset happening. First of all, the best time to repair the roof is when the sun is shining. The economy's strong, so we should be doing something now, and I see leaders doing that. We're broadening our definition of where you can find talent, coding boot camps, vocational and technical schools, people who don't need a 4-year degree. We're no longer just, right now, 75% of venture capital still goes to California, New York, and Boston. But God was egalitarian when he handed out talent. So now you're starting to see companies go into these other places and saying, wow, there's really incredible talent here. And I think that mindset's going to enable us to navigate whatever economic ups and downs we have, as long as we keep a breadth of definition of what talent looks like and then provide alternative ways of getting that talent ready.
Yeah, I mean, in an economic downturn, we look to automate more, right, and increase that. And so that the requirement for us to redeploy, transition workers inside the company becomes even more important. And I also look to the entrepreneurial community to create solutions for this that are more effective and more efficient, more efficient with their resources to get after this problem. And just excited about what we're seeing here at this conference too. So.
Productivity increase trumps everything. So I think that no matter if we're talking about an economic downturn or an economic increase, we need to invest in that. We just do. I would ask a different question. Why is there such an important part of our labor force that should be active in the workforce and that is not?
It is not, yeah.
So are we capable as leaders to tell a compelling story about meaningful work and meaningful contributions to society so that these people re-engage with companies, right? Otherwise, there is wealth creation, and there's a possibility of people calling in rich, if you wish, at work, right? No longer coming to work and no longer participating in the active workforce, because why should they?
It's a good way to end a conversation on bending the arc of human potential at work. Join me in thanking these excellent panelists.
CEO of the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, Priscilla Chan.
Hi, everyone. Hi. Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here with you today, talking about some of the most important work in the world. A good education can change a kid's life. I know because it changed mine. My parents came to this country as refugees from Vietnam. They had almost no English skills or money. Growing up, my first job at age 6 was translating for my family. As a teenager, I'd work at the front desk of the restaurant they'd eventually open. Always, I knew I was an outsider. I was bullied. I worried constantly that my family might not have enough money to get by. But in so many ways, I was so fortunate. I could see a doctor when I got sick. I went to good public schools. I had my mentors, Mr. Long and Mr. Swanson, who really cared about me and showed me that I could succeed in the class, on the tennis courts, in the robotics club. When they first came to this country, my parents could not have possibly imagined that I would go to Harvard one day, much less end up on a stage here today with you. And I've never stopped feeling lucky, because my story is the exception, not the rule. To work in education is to be confronted every day by the fact that so many kids will never have a fair shot in life, not even close. We are all here because we want to change that, and I'm here because I want to do my part. At the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, or CZI as we call it, our education work is focused on ensuring that every student, not just the lucky few, get the education that they need to reach their full potential. We believe that this starts by taking a whole child approach to learning. In short, expand the definition of student success beyond academics to include a student's physical, mental, social, and emotional needs as well. We believe that this must be informed by the science of learning, what we know about how students learn. We've been so inspired by the educators, researchers, engineers, social workers, doctors, and others who've been on the front line of this work for decades, who's told us why they believe in these approaches too. But first, I want to tell you about why I believe in it. When I was in college, I was a tutor in a low-income housing project called Franklin Hill, in a town right next to where I grew up. I saw myself in those elementary school kids. They didn't have a lot, and you could tell they felt different, apart. And they were outsiders just like me. Excuse me. But they didn't have this kind of support that I did. Despite their smarts, their spark, their resilience, they didn't have teachers recommending them for special programs or telling them that they were headed for college. I wanted to make sure that these kids had someone in their corner. I wanted to be that person. One day, one of the girls I tutored had missed school for several days, so I tracked her down to ask her about it. "Where have you been?" I asked. She opened her mouth to speak, and I saw. Her 2 front teeth had been knocked out. My heart sank. I had gotten it all wrong. How could I focus on attendance and grades when I needed to focus on safety, maybe even survival? And more importantly, how could she? I thought, kids can't get the education they need unless they're healthy and safe. So I became a primary care pediatrician to be part of that solution. But once again, once I was on the front lines, I saw just how complicated the problems really were. During my ER shifts, parents would bring their kids in for routine care at 1 or 2 a.m., and I wondered, why? Then I realized that that was the only time when the parents weren't working. I remember seeing a young woman coming in with HIV symptoms, not well controlled. I asked her, why aren't you taking your treatment? Turns out, it wasn't because she didn't want to, but that every time she ran away from an abusive foster family, she lost access to her medical care. As a tutor, I was trained to see kids as students. As a doctor, I was trained to see them as patients. But I finally saw them that we needed a system that let me work with them as a whole person, people with complex, messy, deeply interconnected challenges. Because the truth is, the things that we think about as different aspects of child development, physical health, academics, mental health, social emotional skills, they're actually inextricably linked. And when any of them are left unaddressed, the challenges start to compound. You can't learn multiplication tables if you're hungry, or if nobody's figured out that you can't see the board, or that if you feel so unsafe at home, you can't possibly raise your hand in class. Now, teachers have always known this to be true, but it can be tempting to shy away from it, or maybe just de-emphasize it, because confronting it means that we're responsible for entangling this incredibly complex web of challenges. And that's really hard, especially for teachers. I know, because as a former 4th and 5th grade science teacher, I've been there. Yet, when we design our systems around this whole child approach to learning, and we give teachers the support they need to really meet their children's needs, so that kids feel not only challenged, but safe and healthy and cared for, the results can be incredible. One study looked at what happens when at-risk kids get a mentor, someone who sees them not just as a student or a patient, but a whole person to support. Those students were 55% more likely to enroll in college and 130% more likely to have a leadership position. Another researcher looked at social emotional skills, which are rarely prioritized in the classroom. He found that those skills were 10 times more predictive of long-term achievement than academics. Again, these approaches are not new. Teachers have always known that kids don't learn in a vacuum, but they haven't been given the right tools to meet the challenges that they face every day. Pioneers like Maria Montessori understood and acted upon that knowledge, but in practice, the idea still remains somewhat revolutionary. All of this got me asking, what if we based our schools in a better understanding of what actually helps kids learn? What if we invested just as much in every aspect of a child's development as we do in their academic progress? I decided to start a school like that in East Palo Alto, where more than 90% of students in the local school district receive free or reduced price lunch. At the primary school, teachers, parents, pediatricians, mental health professionals all work together to give the students the support that they need to thrive. That support begins before kids even enter the classroom, and it extends to families who might be struggling to find housing or work or a way to put food on the table. It's just been 3 years since the school opened, and already we see how big of a difference a holistic approach can make. Let me just give you one example. Recently, there was a little girl at the primary school who always slept past nap time. She started having big emotional outbursts in the classroom. You may guess how this may typically play out. Discipline the child, email the parents, hope for the best. But at the primary school, the story played out a little differently. Teachers raised a flag, then a parent coach talked with the mother. It turned out they were experiencing homelessness, and the little girl didn't have a place to sleep at night. So the school stepped in. The little girl got additional time to rest, she got help expressing her emotions, and her mom got connected to housing and employment resources to help address the root problem. We don't sacrifice academic performance to do this. In fact, we're seeing this work drive even stronger academic results. In this program, kids are flourishing. Entire families are flourishing. Our hope is that eventually, what we learn at the primary school will help other schools take on these approaches as well. But right now, for kids in East Palo Alto, getting into the primary school can feel like a stroke of luck. And that's not okay. We're working towards a world where every child gets an education that gives them a fair shot. Of course, we have a long road ahead of us. As you all know, the American education system was designed in the 1800s, before we knew much about child development. So it was one size fits all. Basically, we expect millions of children to learn in the same way, in the same pace, every day. Some kids, like me, get lucky and we do well in the system. Other kids get lucky and have parents who can find them a system that fits their needs better. But kids who aren't lucky, they struggle. So how do we change that? I think the medical field actually offers a lot of wisdom here. Like in education, the stakes are impossibly high, life or death. And in education, collaboration is tough. Researchers want exact clarity, and real life is complicated. Yet in medicine, the system ensures that advances in science make it into practice. But in education, those linkages are often flimsy or broken. In medicine, progress is never as fast as we want it to be, but over time, it accumulates. For so many diseases, it's easier to fight them now than it was even 5 or 10 years ago. That's how much the field has advanced. How can we build a system that drives this type of progress in education? That's our mission at CZI. We see that mission as having 2 parts. First, we help further and fund learning and child development science. We're fortunate to have 2 world-renowned experts, Dr. Bror Saxberg and Dr. Brooke Stafford-Brazard at CZI. They work to ensure that our work is informed by an understanding of how children and their brains develop and allow us to take a more holistic approach. In many ways, schools know how much progress a student is making in reading and writing, which is critical. But sometimes those skills don't necessarily translate to success in college or the workforce. Cognitive skills like attention, memory, executive function. Social emotional skills like stress management, resilience, and the ability to develop healthy relationships. Those non-academic skills are critical too. That's why we're supporting researchers at Yale and Tufts who are helping us better understand how students build these skills from early childhood through adolescence. Second, we're working with schools and teachers to put research like this into practice and to help support new models that meets the needs of the whole child. The truth is, we haven't kept our schools up to date on best practices and techniques that really helps children learn. For example, it's pretty common for a student to complete a really big project and finish a unit without getting feedback until the class has entirely moved on. Research tells us that's not a great way to learn. A group of Maryland teachers we support work to develop NeuroTeach Global. It's an online tool that uses learning science principles like feedback and repetition to help teachers apply that science in their own classrooms and share that with teachers elsewhere. You've already heard me talk about the primary school. Another example of a model that's learning is the Summit Learning Program, which now operates in more than 400, close to 400 schools. Summit's goal is to empower teachers to better meet the needs of individual students. Every Summit Learning classroom focuses on 3 key things: teaching through projects, developing lifelong learning skills, and cultivating deep relationships between students and their mentors. That last point is really important because there's a critique that because Summit uses software, we're looking to replace teachers. Really, though, the opposite is true. Summit places an enormous importance on that student-teacher relationship, and the software tool is just a way to strengthen it. We would never advocate for a world in which students sit alone at their computer screens and technology takes the place of a teacher. Nothing can ever take the place of a teacher. And the use of technology to support student learning must always be done in a way that protects privacy and security of their information. But let me share an example of how Summit really works. When Summit teachers were first starting out, they said it was really tough to mentor so many kids in the classroom. Every kid needed a check-in and reminders, and it could be hard to remember where they left off the last time. That's when teachers asked engineers and child development experts for help. The result was a software tool that they built together. It helps teachers to schedule reminders with mentor check-ins and let them track their notes. Teachers can quickly gauge where a student is at, where they're falling behind, where they're progressing, and give them feedback about where they're at. But don't take my word for it. Let's hear from some of the teachers in the program.
Teaching in a traditional classroom, the challenges for me was meeting the needs of every learner.
I never really got to know kids, and now in this Summit Learning program, I am able to mentor students.
The engagement level is a huge difference from a traditional setting to a Summit Learning setting.
It's a very different environment, and it's lively. It gives them the opportunity to be able to focus on things that they need more help on.
They are learning how to advocate for themselves. They are learning to tell me what they need. I build way deeper relationships with my students.
I'm able to celebrate each student individually, and I love it. Did not get to do that before.
I always get excited when I see that video. So although the program is still young and improving, the early results are promising. The Pasadena Independent School District in Texas started piloting the Summit Learning Program in 2015. In just 2 years, 7th graders who were the furthest behind their peers made a 17% gain in the state math assessment and a 20-point gain in the reading assessment. I'm also excited to see what a new wave of education-focused social entrepreneurs are bringing to the table here, and many of you are here today. Through our ventures work at CZI, for instance, we recently funded a company called Raise Me. Their model is focused on offering micro-scholarships to reward and incentivize students and their behaviors that will get them into college and stay on track once they're there. About 40% of students on Raise Me are the first in their families to enter college. Through real-time feedback, mentoring, support, and guidance in the college admissions process, they're helping more students see how their work connects to their hopes for the future. Finally, there's another school that we work with called Valor Collegiate in Tennessee. Valor was founded by twin brothers, one an educator and the other a social worker. Pretty convenient, right? They came together to build a school that teaches social and emotional development as rigorously as academics. One way Valor does that is through exercises called circles. Circles happen once a week, and they're grounded in development science. They're a structured, facilitated way for kids to build deeper relationships with their peers and develop social emotional skills. For those of you who think this might be a little touchy-feely, the results speak for themselves. Valor schools rank in the top 5% of academic achievement in Tennessee, and Valor circles are now being used by more than 18,000 students nationwide. New approaches and models like these are almost always born of collaboration, not just between twin brothers, but between people across the systems with questions and where they can discover new insights, test new ideas, like so many of you here today. I'm incredibly hopeful about what innovation we can achieve in education, but I'm also realistic. As you all know, this work is tough. We certainly don't have all the answers. Nothing is simple. Progress takes time. Straightforward successes are rare, and there's no shortage of critics for any approach taken. But those are not reasons not to try. They're reasons to be bold, together, to establish a shared understanding that's taken for granted in medicine, that we can and we must get better, and that it's everyone's job to make it happen. I'm standing here today because so many people were passionate about supporting kids like me. The teacher who opened my mind to new ideas and showed me what was possible. The administrators who gave me a safe and healthy place to learn. The people outside the school system who pushed it to be the best it could be. In other words, I'm standing here today because people like you were in my corner. So from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you. Our kids and our country are better for the work that you do. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Director of the Mind, Brain, and Education Program, Harvard University, and President of Populous, Todd Rose.
Hi. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
So we've known each other for a few years. I like to say it was before CZI was CZI, startup education.
It's true.
One of the things that was so fascinating to me listening to your remarks is just how far the work has come. I know it may not feel that way, to you in the work, but and in particular, how far your thinking has come. So, we've got, 13 minutes or so. And I thought what I'd use this time is just ask a few questions, largely around building on the remarks you made, sort of thinking about some of the choices you made and why you made them. Okay. And I want to start, your remarks and here and in other places really center on kids, on children, their needs. And, you've been around, whether you're a tutor, you started a school, and you have children of your own. So I want to start by this question, which is one of my favorite questions, just because I'm always interested in how people respond, is what surprises you about children?
Kids are each so different. I know that's what you expect me to say, because I talked about personalized learning. But I've spent a lot of time working with kids. And I still have a reading group. I read with a bunch of 4-year-olds at the primary school every Wednesday morning. And you always have some trouble engaging all the kids at the same time. And there's maybe one kid who's running off, not wanting to do what I was planning on doing that morning. And you have to ask the question of why. Because oftentimes we jump to the action. Ask a question, sit him next to you. But we don't take the step back to ask, why is that student doing that? And the reasons, in my experience, have a vast range of possible answers. The material's too basic, not interested. Didn't sleep at all last night. ADHD, hungry. We don't know. And until we actually ask why and develop a better understanding and relationship with the student, what we do may not actually get the kid to actually engage in what we want, get them to draw them back into the circle. And asking why is so important because kids only have so many ways of expressing themselves, and so the end pathway for all different types of issues can look the same and have dramatically different reasons for why.
So let's build on that. Okay, so to me that suggests the sort of logical need for something like some form of personalization, right? We're not going to treat every kid the same. And that makes me think about, you mentioned Summit Learning, which I know is a really big investment on the part of CZI to bring that kind of model scale. So I know you already said a few things, but for people that don't know, maybe just expand, I'd like to know a little bit, how's it going, right? You mentioned almost 400 schools. And what are you most proud of so far with it?
I think Summit Learning we've built in collaboration with Summit Public Schools, and it's really taken their pedagogical approach of how do you actually personalize learning. So there's 3 components: the projects, the mentorship, and the self-directed learning. And the thing that's been so exciting and promising in the strong implementations is that you walk into a classroom and you almost don't recognize it. And one thing that drives me nuts is personalized learning, kids behind computers. That's not what it is. And what one school leader said is you walk in and you can hear it. Before you see what personalized learning is, you hear it because kids are asking questions, driving their own learning, working in small groups. And it's not one teacher's voice, it's everyone's voice really working together in the classroom, and you never know what to really expect. So I think that's not quantifiable, that piece around self-direction, purpose, wanting to really understand the why and drive your learning and see it in the real world. And that's the work that we're excited to be complementing at CZI. It's what is that developmental trajectory of what purpose looks like over a child's life? How do we know what it should look like and how to help teachers have tools to nudge it in either way? And so that's the part that we don't know how to quantify yet is the part that's the most exciting about what is happening in the Summit Learning schools.
It reminds me, the first time I ever went into one of the schools, which is a proper Summit school, the thing that I took away was the confidence that the kids had. And it's like, what do you do with that? You can't quantify it, but it was you could tell, right?
Yeah.
Something about them. In that same vein then, okay, at the end of the day, it is software in addition to a curriculum and other things. What has been sort of the biggest obstacle or obstacles to getting this implemented in schools?
So an important saying that we have at CZI is that technology is not the silver bullet. At CZI, we're a philanthropy where we build technology and advocacy and we do grant making, but we know that is in a very specific niche. And the part that is hard is not building the software. You can build software in isolation anywhere. That's not hard. The part that's actually hard is really listening, getting a good sense of what teachers and school leaders are asking for, and also the professional development that needs to come along with this. Because it is a new way of thinking about the student. It is a new way of thinking about the classroom, and really making sure that that component of teaching and learning, the professional development that prepares the educator for this, is in the right place. Is the part that, not what we do, it's what Summit does, but also that's the part that we need to continue working on.
Okay. Let's stick on the theme of obstacles. Positive subject. When I hear your remarks and the vision you are painting for a future of education, one that's about a whole child, it's about taking luck out of the equation, it's about allowing every child to realize their full potential, right? That's not unambitious, right? And it's a pretty big transformative view for education. So again, on the theme of obstacles, I want to think about what are the obstacles then, right, to realizing that vision? Because I think everyone in this room, I doubt there's many people who would say we don't want that. So where do you see the obstacles lying for us getting there as a country?
I think we have to actually expand our definition of success. And that's going to be hard. That's actually transformative change. Because right now, we are all running and it's table stakes, right? You have to get into college. What are the academic outcomes that you need? What are the standardized test results that you need? But if we don't actually embrace a broader definition of success, resilience, purpose, identity, executive function, all these other components that we know are important in actually persevering in college and having success later in life, we won't be oriented. If we don't have that as a North Star, we can't run towards it. And we won't actually be able to set up our systems in the way we educate children to reach that definition of success. And I think there's a lot that we need to do there, both like, we can't end in a state where it's like, well, you feel it.
Right.
That's not good enough. Because if we're asking people to make real substantive change, we need to know what it is and why it's important. And so there's a lot more work to get there, but I think if we all retired in our careers with an eye towards a path toward that broader definition of success, that would be a goal worth working towards.
So if we have a more expanded view of success, you think that's a primary, we've got to get to there, get over this first obstacle to being able to transform systems. You've hit on this both in your remarks and then in some of the comments here around technology, but I want to ask this anyway, because in some ways, no matter what else we say, there probably nobody in this audience, but there are plenty of people who, like, when we say we know that we need technology to do this kind of personalization at scale, there's no way around that. But when they hear that, they often think it's about giving kids a laptop or an iPad at best, or at worst, it really is kids sitting in front of a computer in isolation. Yeah. Again, I know you've mentioned this, but I just want to hear, like, how do you, like, what is your view of the role of technology then for this?
Yeah, I think right now our conversation about screen time needs to get more nuanced. I completely agree with you. We cannot have computers like babysitting students. They can't just be passing time there. That is not what time in school should be about. At the same time, we need to figure out what are the pieces that actually enhance the adult relationship. What can we do to tee up a student and an adult, a teacher, to actually have a more enriching in-person experience, a deeply meaningful exchange? And that may be what I was talking about before, sort of like a simple note and reminder system, like this is what you talked about last with this mentee. But it could be knowing like, oh, that's funny, you only do your math, this type of math problem, why not this? And to really get beyond what can be done independently and get a teacher to engage on problem solving and nudging the kid in the right next direction. I think that's where we want to get to, and like we all have room to improve there, but that is the North Star of using how we want to think about using technology in the classroom.
Okay, so again, let's go back to this big vision that I think most people would embrace about what we want the purpose of education to be. I'm going to flash forward a little bit because let's think about what success would actually look like, right? At sort of like the systems level, but also like at the child level. Like, if you get your vision, what does it look like?
I think it means that we have kids and new generations that can grow. They're adaptable. They are ready for new versions of the world because they know how to learn. They understand themselves. They understand how to feel fulfilled in dimensions that are more than just the simple one-dimensional axis that we think about in terms of definitions of success. And I think that's exciting.
So I'm lucky I have 2 minutes left. So
okay.
I'm going to ask you one that I've always, okay. So we both have kids.
Yep.
My kids are actually done with college. It's getting.
Yeah, it always confuses me when you say that.
When you get married when you're 19, that's what happens. But just don't take life advice from me is what I'm trying to say. But when I was looking at schools, when I was thinking about school, it wasn't that long ago, but like what I looked for quality was pretty narrow, right? It was like traditional, what we think of, like how many AP classes, SAT scores, colleges. The world you're talking about, the schools you're talking about something very different, right? So I think about it, we're going to need parents to know what it is they're asking for. I wonder just a little bit like, what should they be looking for? And maybe even specifically, eventually you're going to have to think about this. What are you going to look for your kids?
I actually have a very simple question that I look for my girls. I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. And I actually look for in the school that I started, the primary school. Does the school believe your voice is important? Is what you say valued? Doesn't matter if you're 1 or 17. Does the teacher actually hang on to what your idea is or what you say as critically important because it can change the world? That's non-tangible, I'm sorry. But I want to look for that because I think more than teaching kids if their math and reading and letters is, are you important? And is your voice going to be heard in this world? And so that's my North Star for my kids and all the other kids that I work with and feel responsible for.
Oh, great. Yeah. All right, well, look, we're right at 0, so thank you so much. It was great talking to you.
Thank you, everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, in honor of the 50th anniversary of Sesame Street, please welcome President and COO Sesame Workshop, Steve Youngwood and Elmo.
So, I'm Steve Youngwood.
Oh, and Elmo is Elmo.
So, I do want to say, by the way, hearing Priscilla was wonderful because, we are partners with the primary school, and I can tell you from firsthand experience, the work that they are doing is real, and the impact is real, and it is a pleasure to be able to help them achieve their goal. But it is great to be here with you, Elma.
Yes?
And I thank you so much for flying all the way out here to come to ASU GSV.
The what?
I said thanks for coming to ASU GSV.
Mr. Steve, Elmo doesn't want to embarrass you, but are you sure that's how it's supposed to go?
Yeah, I'm completely sure. That's how it's supposed to go, ASU GSV.
Okay, well, that's okay. Elmo learned it a different way. Yeah, it goes A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. But you know what? Don't worry, Mr. Steve. Elmo can help you with your letters. These things take time. It's fine.
You do know your alphabet very well, Elmo. But Elmo, I'm not talking about ABCs.
Oh.
ASU GSV is the name of this conference we're at. And there's something pretty exciting coming up later. Want to guess what it is?
Is it LMNOP? Elmo's just kidding.
You're very...
It's an LMNOP. Elmo will be here all week.
Not if you keep it up, you won't. No. So, anyway, it is sort of true. You and I are going to be here tomorrow afternoon to talk about Sesame Workshop and our 50th anniversary of Sesame Street. But later today, something really special is happening. It's a pop-up event called Early Futures.
Pop-up. Pop-up. Elmo likes that pop-up. Or is it a pop-up like when you pop bubbles up?
You finished? Not exactly. It is a special event all about early childhood. Little kids.
Oh, what about Little Monsters?
Sure, Little Monsters too. They're going to have expert speakers, interesting panels, some great discussions about the most critical time in a child's life for learning, the early years. And in fact, the workshop's working with two partners called Promise Venture Studio and the Meteor Network to make this happen. And we want everyone here to come by and pursue the innovation for early childhood development.
So you're saying it's not about bubbles?
No, Elmo, it is not a bubble event. But you know what? Maybe you and I could go find some bubbles. What do you say?
Hey, that sounds perfect. Boy, Elmo's ready for a new adventure. Come on, let's go.
Okay, I thank you, Elmo. I thank everyone. You're going to see Elmo and I back here on Stage X during the lunchtime plenary tomorrow. And please go to Harbor Eye Ballroom from 2 to 5 p.m. just after this event to come to see the early futures. Thank you.
Bye-bye,
Goodbye.
everybody. Elmo loves you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome former Google talent leader, founder, hero, author, work rules, insights from inside Google that will transform how we live and lead, Laszlo Bach.
Man, that is, whoa, that's loud. That is a tough act to follow. I want you to just clear all that from your mind. Go to the event, but reduce the bar you have for my presentation, please. How long have you all been sitting here? About a little over an hour, hour and a half? Okay. I got bad news for you. And the timer down here is giving me half the time I thought I had, so I'm going to ignore that and hope it's going up. Okay, good, I've got 90 minutes. So everything I'm going to share with you today is backed by research and science. One of the hard things about talking about people issues is we're all people, we've all managed people, we all have opinions. Most of our opinions about how to manage people are wrong. We all think we can hire great people. By definition, we hire average people. We all think we're unbiased. By definition, we all carry biases. So I'm going to start, though, with some science that says the human mind generally can only can really fully focus for about 90 minutes before people just get mentally fatigued. So I'm going to sacrifice a minute or two of precious time and ask everyone to stand up. Quickly, quickly. Just stand up, stretch a little bit, flex, reach for the sky. Put your wallets and purses under the tape. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, back down. You've had enough. Thank you. So in theory, you should be a little more attentive and ready to go. My name's Laszlo Bach. I have been incredibly lucky in my life. I was born in communist Romania, came to the United States as a refugee when I was young. My mom had been an English teacher, so speaking to this group is particularly important to me. I worked, my first job was actually working as a teacher. And then later I taught English abroad a little bit. I worked as a tutor. Then I had a bunch of other jobs, including leading what we called people operations at Google for about a decade. I since left. I started a company called Humu, where our mission is to make work better for everyone, everywhere. And we use that by using machine learning-powered nudges, tiny little interventions that have a dramatic impact on behavior. And I'll talk about that in the context of education a little bit later. While I was at Google, Larry Page was kind enough to allow me to write a book about how to make work better, where we took some of what Google did, but also the best science and case studies from around the world to really synthesize how do you build great organizations that perform incredibly well, that do good for people. The only reason I mention it is I donate all the money to charity. There's a fantastic organization called Peninsula Bridge, for example, up near San Francisco. They work with grades 6 through 12 kids, basically poor, underprivileged kids. The only criteria to participate is you have to have one supportive adult in your life. They have a 100% high school graduation rate and a 100% college graduation rate. And it's thanks to this that I'm able to support things like that. So, yeah, 3 people were excited about that. So in the book, there's a bunch of principles about how to make work better. And again, they're all rooted in science. They work, they scale. For this audience, I'm going to focus on 3 of them. The importance of giving work meaning, and why that's harder than it looks, and why it's more important than it sounds. The importance of being both frugal and generous, Because even at a place like Google, you'll be shocked to learn there wasn't always infinite money, certainly not for my team. And in the real world, the startup world, there's no money. And I know in education, you're not exactly rolling in the dough either. And the third is the importance of nudging. Tiny little interventions that have a profound impact on human behavior. And I'm going to try to connect all these to the world of education. I know people here come from, there's startups, there's university administrators, there's people in the people field, all kinds of different backgrounds. I'll try to hit on as many as I can and try to make this useful. Amy Rosinski is a professor at Yale University. She happens to be a friend of mine, and she does work on giving people meaning in their jobs. And one of the things she's found in her research is that only about a third of people find their work to be meaningful. And that's true regardless of the profession. So you may not be surprised to learn that only a third of lawyers find their work personally meaningful and fulfilling. But it's also true of teachers. It's also true of doctors and nurses. It's also true of people who work in the clergy. I had a friend who's a minister. I said, this cannot be true. This is like, clergy, that must be the most mission-driven thing in the world. You're saving souls of all things. And he said, no, actually, it's very true. I've seen it, because it's too easy to remember the duty, but forget the joy. So it's easy to lose sight of meaning and mission. So Amy, in fact, found that about a third of people find meaning in their work. A third of people find it as a means to an end. I got to make a buck. And a third think of it as a game to be won. I got to climb the ladder. I got to win. I got to compete. I got to get to the next level. Amy went and did research at Yale New Haven Hospital and a number of other hospitals to understand if meaning actually mattered. And she spent time with the janitorial staff. And the janitorial staff, largely uneducated, maybe a high school education at best, largely female workforce, almost entirely black workforce. And what she found was she went into a coma ward, and there were janitors in that coma ward, women who were moving things around the rooms. They would take a painting from one room, take it down and carry it and put it in another room. And when she said to these women, "What are you doing?" they said, "Well, I feel like my job is more than just cleaning. I feel like I'm helping them recover by caring for them. So I figure by moving things around, they're going to feel better, they're going to recover more quickly." Amy said, "You get fired for that. Your job is to change bedpans, not to change paintings." And this woman she was talking to said, "It doesn't matter. There's something more important here, and I'm helping these people." So drawing that connection to meaning is important, but I don't want to just give you stories. Adam Grant is a professor at Wharton, and he's fantastic. And his thesis, his PhD thesis, was on, does meaning have a business impact in organizations? So this is data from an organization that raises scholarship money for colleges. So some of your institutions may use these. It's a third party. You give them the alumni database. You give them likelihood of giving, and they just dial for dollars. And in this call center, when Adam started working with them, the average person was raising $1,300 per week. By the end of working with them, the average person was raising more than $5,000 per week. And the way he did that was by connecting people to meaning in their work. He thought, let me get stories from graduates and have those stories get told to the people working the call center. And the stories had no impact at all. Because I went to a great college, I learned a lot, I made lifelong friends. Didn't impact performance. He had them collect a second set of stories. Tell me what this meant to you. And so he got an essay back that said, thanks to this scholarship, I was exposed to the complete works of William Shakespeare for the first time. And as a result of that, not only did I gain a deeper understanding of the human language, but I realized what I'm living and experiencing today is the same thing that people experienced 500 years ago. I'm part of something bigger than myself. And that was Group C. Those people who were exposed to those kinds of essays saw meaning in their work. Raised $3,000 a week. And then he had the students come in for 5 minutes once a month and tell their stories. More than $5,000 were raised. And he replicated this study again and again. On average, connecting people to meaning in their work makes them 21% more productive. So the simple trick, the way to do this in your organizations, because remember, only a third of people find meaning in their work on average, is to, number one, go to the people who seem really fired up, who talk about why they're doing this, and ask them and have them tell their stories. Number two, go to the beneficiaries of your work and have them tell stories about what it personally meant to them. Didn't give them a better job or career. That's table stakes. It changed how they viewed the world. Those are the stories you want to tell. Second broad thing I want to talk about is the importance of being both frugal and generous. So Google's a rich company. When I started Google, it had 30% net profit margins. I think it's dropped since then, but this was a company with a ton of money to spend. My department, people operations, did not have a lot of money to spend. I remember one time Larry came and he said, we should do stuff with maker fairs, because Larry's kids were getting to that age where he was taking interest. So I went and kind of looked at my budget and came back and said, Larry, to do this right, to do it really well, I need $300,000 so I can cut back from these programs that we're doing for our employees. Scrape together $300,000. We'll do this amazing stuff. Larry didn't think that was a good idea. He wasn't impressed. He went to the head of engineering. The head of engineering asked a guy, a friend of mine, Chris DeBona, who was in engineering, hey, Chris, put together a plan for makers fairs. Chris came back. He said, well, I need $7 million. Head of engineering said, no problem. And so Google spent $7 million on maker fairs that year, right? So even in companies and organizations that have a tremendous amount of money, it's not evenly distributed. It's kind of like the real world. And now that I live in the real world, at a startup that's venture funded, that loses money every single month, there's certainly not infinite money. So the key principle is, if you are resource constrained, you need to find times when you can be generous to people. And it's incredibly difficult to do. But the two times to do it are when things are really good and when things are really bad. You celebrate the good, and that's a time to be generous, and you care for those around you when things are really bad. So a couple examples. Google, while I was there, we created a benefit for when you die. If you're an employee at Google and you die, all your stock vests, but your surviving spouse or significant other gets half your salary for 10 years. And if you have kids, they get $1,000 a month until they turn either 18 or 24, depending on whether or not they go to college. And the reason we put that in place was because when the company was small, we kind of knew everybody, and sadly, once in a while, awful things happen, and someone would pass away, and we would say, like, okay, let's fix it. Let's write a check to the family. Maybe fix it isn't the right word. Let's do what we can to help. So we write a check to the family for $100,000, $500,000, $1 million. Then we got bigger, and what I realized was I was still seeing all this, but the leadership team wasn't, because they didn't know everybody anymore. So we put this policy in place. We didn't tell anybody. It was only an as-needed policy. And the reason we didn't tell anybody is it's not like it's a recruiting tool, right? You're not going to go on college campuses and say, we've got this benefit, you're going to love it. But I was talking to a journalist, and I let it slip 2.5 years after we put it in place, and employees finally found out that we had been doing this for 2.5 years. And I got a letter from an employee who had cancer, and the cancer was in remission. And every 6 months, this employee had to go get an MRI to make sure the cancer was still gone. And in his letter, he wrote, every 6 months, I have a test. And every 6 months, while I'm lying here being tested, I compose a letter to Larry Page, the founder of Google, in my head saying, please, if the cancer comes back, take care of my family. Last week, I had another test, and I came back clean. And I didn't write a letter in my head. That's a generous thing you can do for people. And it actually doesn't cost that much money. Because at first we would just make the payments, then you get an insurance policy, and thank goodness most people don't have the tragedy of passing away during their working years. Most people live long, healthy lives. So it doesn't happen that often, but when it does, you're there for people. At my company now, at Humu, and again, small venture-funded company, but this is just to illustrate what you can do when you're small. We were inspired by something that happens in Latino communities called a cunita. And a cunita, and I don't know the exact translation, but it's a money pool. Everyone sort of gets together, they donate money. If somebody needs it, they get that money that year, and then the next year everyone donates again. The IRS has a table that says you're legally allowed to make loans to anybody you want, at usually around a 1 or 2% interest rate. So there's no employee tax consequence. It's a legitimate loan. We created something we call the You Are Not Alone loan program. So it's a revolving loan fund. some amount of money that we've set aside where if employees need it for whatever purpose, they can draw on that at a 2% interest rate rather than having to pay, a 25% credit card rate or a bank loan rate. And it makes a real difference in people's lives. So there's opportunities to be generous even when you're small, even when you don't have a lot of resource. I'll give you a couple education examples. I promise this is not pandering. I thought this was awesome long before I knew I was coming here. Starbucks program with ASU about paying tuition for their employees. I think it's brilliant. It's not that expensive. They didn't partner with Harvard or some incredibly high-priced school. They partnered with a place where there's going to be tremendous value for that education, where there's history of results of people going on and bettering themselves. Absolutely brilliant. Not that expensive. Not that far from here, in Santa Clarita, just a little north of Los Angeles, there's a junior high school called La Mesa Junior High School. And the principal, Michelle Colbert-Krantz, does all the things the best principals in the world do, right? At the beginning of school, she's standing outside, shaking hands with each student and calling them by name when they come in. For her staff, she sends out handwritten birthday cards and anniversary cards to celebrate how long they've been at the company, or at the school. But the thing she does that really, I thought was really clever was she gives out kudos bars to people. So she walks around campus and into her meetings and into classrooms, and she carries a bunch of candy bars, kudos bars. And if somebody has done something well, she gives them a kudos. And it's the sweetest, most thoughtful thing in the world. It costs next to nothing. And it's sweet and thoughtful, not just because you're recognizing something in the moment, but because you're giving somebody a memento of that. So I learned about that. I told people at my old job about it while I was there. And when I left, somebody gave me a strong and kind bar, right? There's kind bars, and then there's like the spicy ones or flavorful or whatever. And 3 years later, I still have it. It's on my office, sitting on my shelf, because it tells me that I meant something to that person. So you don't have to spend a ton of money, but you want to be generous when times are good, and particularly generous when times are bad. The third and final thing I want to talk about are nudges. The term nudge was coined by Dick Thaler, who's a professor at the University of Chicago and actually won the Nobel Prize in economics last year for his work on this, and by Cass Sunstein, who's a professor at Harvard Law School, who, even though he did half the work, also did not win the Nobel Prize somehow. So it doesn't feel quite fair. They're both friends. It doesn't seem to be a source of friction. But a nudge is a small intervention that makes it easier to make a good decision. It doesn't remove choice. It doesn't force you to do anything. It just makes it easier to do the right thing. So a couple examples. Do any of your organizations hire people ever? Anybody hire people? Okay, a few. One. Terrific. At Google, we hired people all the time. We'd hire 10,000 to 15,000 people a year out of 3 million resumes a year. And on average, it took people 9 months to become fully productive. And one day with the team, I was wondering, can we make that faster? So we studied all the people who get productive faster than that, because there's a distribution, right? And you see this in your organization. Some people show up, hit the ground running. Some people take 3, 6, 9, 12 months to fully get it. Some people, in fact, get productive faster. And it turns out there's 5 things they do that drive that faster time to productivity. And they're kind of super obvious, simple things that not everyone does. So they form 2 social connections in the first week. They start to build a network. They get a computer that works. One of the 5 most important things. Because it turns out there's something special about that first week in a job. What happens in that first week is you're imprinting. You're like a baby bird coming out of an eggshell. You're like trying to understand the norms, trying to understand what's going on. If you're fighting with IT or trying to get a computer to work, you're not paying attention to that, and it actually degrades your performance over time. And that effect can persist for 18 or 24 or even 36 months. Third thing they do, and this one's a little counterintuitive, they ask for feedback. And that one's a little weird, because when you start a job, you want to show how awesome you are. You want to show that you earned the job, you deserved it. Some people, though, on Wednesday of that first week, go to their boss and say, is this going okay? What can I do differently? And by building in that learning loop early on, they actually continue learning and course correct earlier. So long story short, 9 months to get fully productive on average. and we created a nudge. We would send an email. I don't know if they still do this, but while I was there, on Monday morning, if you're a new hire, you get an email that says, do these 5 things. Make sure your laptop works. Make sure you meet 2 people, et cetera, et cetera. That's one email. The Friday before a new employee starts, their manager gets another email that says, make sure your person does these 5 things. You're nudging both sides because you want the behavior to change. And not everyone opens the email, and not everyone reads it. And rarely do both sides of the equation both actually take action on it. But the time to full productivity dropped from 9 months to 6 months. It's pretty good. 3-month improvement. When you measure it across an employee's life cycle at Google, that's a 2% improvement in productivity. Doesn't sound like a lot, but for every 50 people you hire, that means you're getting 1 free person. For Google, at the time Google had, what was it, $20 billion in net income. That means $400 million a year in extra income. Suddenly, we can fund maker fairs. Finally. I'll give you another example. This is what we've seen at Humu since we started. This is data from a call center. And the outcome metric was first call resolution rate. Like when somebody calls and asks for help, does their issue get resolved? And the range of performance was really tight. It was 85 to 99% of the time, things got resolved the first time for every person in that call center, right? So we're a call center. Everyone here is performing 85 to 99% of the time. First time a call comes in, we resolve it. The reason the low end is 85% is because if you're under 85% first call resolution rate, what happens to you? You get fired. That's how call centers work. And what we found was there were different levels of happiness among different people performing. The top performers were happier than the poor performers. Does that surprise anybody? It shouldn't, because top performers live in a completely different organization. They get different opportunities offered to them. They walk on water. Everybody likes them. Everyone wants to be around them. So if you're a poor performer, whether it's your fault or not, you got to dig your way out of this pit. So we did a bunch of analytics, and what we found was there was a behavioral difference between the top and bottom performers that was driving this change, this difference in happiness. Because the bottom performers were at about an 87% first call resolution rate, the top performers 99%. The behavioral difference was this. In a call center, your time is very tightly measured. There's time spent on the phone, there's time researching, there's legally required breaks, there's time documenting. Right? I just did the call, I had to go offline to talk to a manager, I came back, I resolved it, now I have to write down what happened. That's your time. And then there's this weird thing called unaccounted for time, which is just time that slips through the cracks. That's not exactly captured. The very best performers had 1.5 minutes of unaccounted for time a day. The very worst performers had 30 seconds. Because the very best performers, management left them alone a little bit more. Laszlo's goofing off for a minute. It's fine. He's hitting his numbers. At the other extreme, Laszlo, what are you doing? Get back on the phone. And what's crazy is that incremental 60 seconds, it's not like they had a 1-minute break at 12:01. It's not like the break we had where everyone stood up, right? It was little micro breaks spread throughout the day. Type, 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 answer phone, type, type, type. Okay. Type, 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 answer the phone. That was it. So we send nudges. Make sure you take a break every now and then. If you feel stressed, push back from your keyboard for a second. It's okay to take 20 seconds to clear your head. And we saw the performance difference virtually completely go away. That's the power of a nudge. A small intervention can have a massive, massive difference on performance. So let's come back to the academic environment. Remember Ben Franklin had his 13 values, right? He wrote about this when he was 20. He wrote about 13 things that he thought were important. There were things like, I don't remember the exact language because it was a long time ago for me, but when I learned about it, but it was things like, temperance, basically don't eat till you're full, don't drink till you're tipsy. There was something about the use of language and sort of like not speaking too much and only saying things that are actually useful to the people around you in that conversation. So he had 13 things he wanted to work on. And every month, he had one thing, and he would work on that value. What does this have to do with education? I've been incredibly blessed and lucky. And I have 3 daughters, and the youngest is in 4th grade, but the other 2 are either in or have been through middle school. And we elected to send them, I was a product of public schools the whole way, but we elected to send them to a girls' school for middle school. Because the research is middle school is when girls start pulling back at math and science, right? Social dynamic changes. They're told to be pretty instead of smart, and teachers stop calling on them as much. They don't raise their hands as much. So I go to the open house one night for the middle school, and it's an all-girls school, and it's the biology teacher, and she has an aquarium on her desk at the front of the classroom, and she has a lemon and a lime. And she asks the parents, the dads and moms in the room, I'm going to put these in the water, what's going to happen? Will they float? Will they sink? What's going to happen? All the dads raise their hands. All the men have opinions. The moms did not. And we know from the research that boys are more likely to raise their hands and more likely to speak up sooner than girls. Girls are more likely to wait until they're certain and therefore more likely to get the answer correct than boys. But boys raising their hands creates a positive feedback loop for a teacher. He must be engaged. Look at him raising his hand. I'm going to call on him. And even if it's wrong, I get some interaction. Without realizing there's a positive feedback loop created, that kid gets called on more, the girls get called on less. At this girls' school, who do you think the teacher called on? All the dads. All the dads. And it made me realize, even in that environment where they should know better, they have the same subtle biases, they make the same errors. So, what does that have to do with nudges and with Ben Franklin and with the schools? A very simple nudge. Every single month, figure out one thing that teachers should work on. Teachers are busy. My mom was one. It's an incredibly difficult job. It can be an incredibly lonely job. And it's hard because you don't actually know the results of what you're doing. I mean, you see it in the classroom, but it's going to be 10 or 15 years before these kids grow up and find their paths in the world, right? So the feedback, it's not like somebody clicking on an ad. If somebody searches for Nike and they click on the Nike ad at the top, you know it worked. Kids aren't like that. So very simple nudge. Give a handout in the month of January to every teacher and say, try to call on the girls. That's it. Just raise awareness a little bit. And I don't know enough about teaching to prescribe that as the specific thing, and then each month have a different handout, just try one thing. But I will tell you at Google, we used a handout like that when making promotion and performance decisions. We'd have groups sit around talking about this stuff. They'd have a handout saying, here's the kind of biases we all have. And it created a language and changed behavior such that promotion rates equalized, and we didn't see gender differences in promotion rates after doing that. So a small intervention, as simple as a handout, and you pick what the topic is you want to work on, is enough to actually drive pretty substantial behavioral change. So to kind of go back to the beginning, there's a lot of things you can do. Hiring is a huge topic. How should you hire people? Really difficult to get that right, but it absolutely dictates the destiny of your organization. How you pay people. Most people don't have enough variation within their companies or organizations about how they pay. They think a 5 or 10% pay difference is a lot. It's not enough to keep your best people. But the biggest things I want you to take away is connect people to meaning in their work. And you do that by looking for people who have benefited from the work or who find meaning in telling those stories again and again, because we're storytelling animals. Look for opportunities to be generous. And that could be as simple as handing out a candy bar and telling somebody thank you. And nudge. Rather than doing like this colossal, massive, multi-year change process, look for a small intervention you can make, and ideally nudge not just the person, but the people around them. Those small interventions compound, and they have dramatic impact on human performance and retention and happiness and all the outcomes we care about, like innovation and inclusion and learning and skill development. And if you do any of this stuff, the last thing is number 10. It's an iterative process. Try it, learn from it, try again, learn from it, get better, and constantly improve. With that, I thank you for the time and the privilege of addressing you all today. Thank you very much.